I last left off with the English Civil War and the Puritan Revolution, talking about Oliver Cromwell over here. A very um, militant religious fanatic, that'd be fair to say, although it's not maybe a neutral or nuanced term, but that's how he'd be described by many folks. Um, Cromwell purged Parliament, for example. He had what was called the Rump Parliament, and made it all those who supported his ideas. In 1651, he invaded Ireland and massacred Catholics in what he considered revenge. But Oliver Cromwell left a legacy that is not popular still to this day in certain parts of the world. He asserted English maritime supremacy in the North Atlantic, and then he died. And there was a decade that there was no king in Britain, the British Isles. King Charles II was restored, and the Anglican Church eventually. Okay, and then there was this reverse discrimination, and this happened. So the 1673 Parliament Test Act was that all office holders must be Anglican now. So we kind of went the opposite direction of discrimination. Great outfits, right? Super funky underwear. Oh yeah. Okay, so I had a video here and it's removed because it's not working, so whatever. So the Glorious Revolution. Let's see. What's the best way to just go over this? Well, okay, Charles II dies. His brother James becomes king. King James II is Catholic, and there's a concern that he could restore Catholicism. So his Protestant daughter and her Dutch husband are brought to power, okay, at his expense. And then this resulted in Parliament passing the Bill of Rights. That's significant to U.S. history. And if you look at the Bill of Rights here compared to U.S. Bill of Rights, you will see that our founders weren't working from scratch when it came to some of their ideas. All right. So thus the new notion that government had a contractual duty to ensure people's rights came into this period, okay? And that's all I will say for here on that. Now, at this time, what we also, it's important to bring out, there was a creation of standing armies and militarized states. So there was a rise of large standing armies. And even in peacetime, the military was often half the state's budget. In wartime, around 80%. This is going to create, obviously, inevitable war, and it's also just going to be, it's expensive and ridiculous. I mean, we think about sometimes North Korea gets accused of having more bullets than grain, but this was a common practice in Europe at the time. Not bullets, of course, but you get to my point. Now, on the other side of this, before the scientific revolution, prior to the 17th century, almost everything known about science came from, Africa, Asia, and the Islamic world. Now remember, Europeans didn't think that Africa had history, but when I talked about Africa, I'm also probably talking more about the parts that they thought did have history, like Egypt, for example, okay? Ibn Sina, or Avicenna as he's known in the West, became very important to understanding of, like, let's say, medicine and certain sciences. Here is an example, okay? And then Europe, the Europeans started taking on new perspectives. So we have Nicholas Copernicus, that the sun is the center of the universe. This was a very controversial and big deal. Johannes Kepler, talking about the laws of motion. The scientific method that is so central to thinking in a scientific way, by Francis Bacon. And René Descartes, he was a philosopher and a mathematician. He's where we get the term Cartesian coordinates. But he also turned philosophy to the subjective, where he tried to think about what a person could know by their own mind, outside of like authorities, for example. The turn to the subjective. And then we have the ever famous Galileo Galilei, and or Galileo, say, and we know about his trials for standing up against the church, right? So this is just a little insight into some of the other conflicts going on at the time, which was, so we talked about parliaments and nobles versus kings, and then we're talking about traditions and church versus new kind of scientific perspectives. Okay? And what we do then is we reach into the Enlightenment, which is really a whole new way of thinking within European circles. And I will get to that in the next lecture.